Initially, my memories of the crash were limited. A fractured, imperfect recollection missing crucial details. When I tried to remember those details, a series of jumbled images played in my mind, like I was reviewing a handful of blurry, out-of-focus Polaroids that someone had shuffled into a non-chronological order. Over time, that changed. My memories became clearer. But in the beginning, everything was a haze of motion and sound. This is what I remembered in the beginning. Divya and I are sitting next to each other. The other two passenger seats on the opposite side of the aisle are empty. The pilot turns around to us and I only see him for a second, but there's something memorable about him. It's not the fear stitched to his face, nor is it the words he shouts to us. It's something else. Something important. My sister smiling, big brown eyes alive with infectious excitement. Her lips are moving, trying to tell me something over the mechanical thrums of the aircraft's single engine. I peer out the window, watching the Alps pass under us. Verdant, green valleys. Smatterings of pine trees dotting the landscape, forming unique and cryptic shapes like geological birthmarks. Not birthmarks, actually. More like scars, which is an important distinction, and I do not know why. An ear-splitting noise, deafening and sudden like an explosion, but there's no fire. Not at first, at least. The gnawing and grinding of metal. Screams. From me, Divya, the pilot, and from someone else. Maybe there was someone else on the plane. The aircraft tilts forward. We enter a death spiral. Violent movement rips the pilot from his chair, and he's gone. There's something important about him. It's not the fear on his face, it's something else. Before I can tell what it is, we're meters from the ground. There's the roaring of atmosphere rushing through the holes in the cabin. Terror swells in my throat. I want to turn my head. I want to see my sister. But there's not enough time. Everything goes black. I am plunged into the heart of a deep, silent shadow. It's not death, but it's similar. Briefly, I return. My consciousness bubbles up from the depths of that shadow, and my eyes flutter open. It's quiet now. No more screams, no more chewing of metal. Only the humming chorus of cicadas fills my ears. It was early morning when we crashed. Now it's twilight. Air moves through my lungs, and it smells faintly of smoke and iron. Finally, I do turn my head and I see Divya. She's not far, but she's broken. Her battered body hangs in a nearby oak tree like a warning. Dusky red blood stains the bark around Divya. It's sticky and warm on my fingertips when I am close enough to touch it, leaning against the trunk, reaching to pull her down from the canopy. She's much too high up, but I keep flinging my hands towards the heavens, pleading for a miracle. Again and again, I tried to get a hold of Divya, as if I would be able to anchor her soul to the earth with a tight enough grasp on her body. I blink, and when I open my eyes, I am alone in a hospital room, lying in bed. Now, there's no noise at all. Pure, vacuous silence for hours and hours as I slip in and out of awareness, until a question shatters that silence. "What do you remember about what happened to you, son?" says a tall, grizzled man in a dirty white lab coat, gray blue eyes intensely fixed on my own. That first week in the hospital went by quickly. Dr. Osler and Nurse Anneliese were very attentive, practically at my beck and call. My suspicions were at a minimum during that time, so I could actually lay back and rest. When I was finally lucid enough, I explained what I recalled about the crash to Dr. Osler, who listened intently from a wooden chair aside the hospital bed. My sister and I were Boston natives on holiday in the European countryside. We were flying over the Eastern Alps when something went terribly wrong with the plane. I couldn't remember if it was a spontaneous mechanical failure or if the pilot had accidentally collided with something. Either way, we fell to the earth like Icarus. I thought of Divya. A question idled in my vocal cords for a long while. A leech with hooked teeth buried in the flesh of my throat, resisting release. Eventually, I asked. Courage was the spark. Apathy was the match. The resulting fire singed that leech off my throat and out my mouth. Either she was alive or she wasn't. Do you know if my sister made it to the hospital? Brown hair, mole on her cheek. The doctor inquired, his voice warm and dulcet like a sip of hot apple cider spiked with brandy. I gulped and nodded, bracing myself. Yes, we have her here. She's in critical condition, but we're taking such good care of her. We believe she'll pull through, but she hasn't woken up yet. Relief galloped through my body, and I let my head fall back on the pillow, tears welling under my eyes. As I quietly wept, he continued to fill in the gaps, detailing where I was, how I got here, and what was next. Essentially, the plane crash landed outside of Bavaria, southeast Germany. A farmer watched our meteoric descent from the sky and immediately called for an ambulance. Now my sister and I were admitted to a small county hospital about 10 minutes from the wreck site. Both of my legs were broken, and I lost a significant amount of blood, but otherwise I was intact. Divya suffered greater internal injuries, so she was in the intensive care unit. Dr. Osler expected her to make a full recovery. There were no other survivors. He stood up, patted me on the shoulder, told me to sleep, and informed me that Anneliese would be in soon to record my vital sign. When can I see her? When can I see my sister? His footfall slowed until they came to a complete stop. He remained motionless for an uncomfortably long period of time, with his hand wrapped around the brass doorknob and his back to me. Never said a word. After about a minute of eerie inaction, he twisted the knob, pulled the door open, and left. That's when I first noticed something about my situation was desperately wrong. As the doctor exited my well-lit, windowless hospital room, I glimpsed whatever was outside. In an attempt to conceal it, he didn't swing the door wide open. Instead, he cracked it only slightly, just enough to squeeze his gaunt body through the partition, with his lab coat audibly dragging against the doorframe. Despite his attempt to block my view, I saw enough to plant a seed of doubt in my head about Dr. Osler and what he had told me. Clock on the wall read noon, but whatever was outside the door was pitch black. The foreboding darkness outside my room was only the first domino to fall. Though, once I fully registered the uncanniness of that detail, a handful of other equally bizarre details came to the forefront of my mind, and I did not have a satisfactory explanation for any of them. For example, the hospital was completely silent. No POS system asking for the location of a particular surgeon or announcing that visitor hours were over. No ambient noise from a heavy hospital bed thundering down the hallway. Even my room was dead silent. Initially, I didn't notice. The quiet allowed me to fall into sleep without issue. That said, I was wearing an oxygen monitor. I had an IV in my arm. Machines above me appeared to be connected to both things, and yet they were silent too. Shouldn't they beep? Shouldn't they make some kind of sound? The only noises I ever heard were the voices of the hospital's staff members, and only when they were in my room talking to me. Which brings me to Nurse Anneliese. Initially, she was a tremendous source of comfort. Her very presence was sedating, humble and grandmotherly. Silver hair bustling over her shoulders as moved through the room. A charming, wrinkled smile on her face as she listened to me recount my life history to kill some time. Constant reassuring words about how well the hospital was taking care of me. But like everything else, once I looked a little harder, Anneliese went from likable and endearing to peculiar and terrifying. First off, it seemed like she never left the hospital. For a week straight, she was my only nurse, coming and going from my room at random times. Never anything that implied a shift schedule. One day, she came into my room 3 times within an hour to take my temperature, and didn't appear again until the following day. Another time I woke up to her determining my blood pressure, the rubbery cuff tightly compressing my bicep. No stethoscope pressed to my arm, which I am pretty sure is required for the measurement. She wasn't even watching the numbers rise and fall on the instrument's pressure meter. Instead, she was staring right at me, reciting the same phrase over and over again. Are not we taking such good care of you? Are not we taking such good care of you? Are not we taking such good care of you? All the while, she was continuously inflating the cuff, pausing for a moment, releasing the air, and then repeating that process. I just pretended to be asleep at first, but after an hour of that, my patience ran thin. Anneliese, do not you ever go home, or are you the only goddamn nurse in this whole hospital? I shouted. Cuff's deflating hiss punctuated the tension, slowly fading to silence over a handful of seconds. Eventually, she stood up, walked to the door, and exited, saying nothing at all. The behavior reminded me of how Dr. Osler reacted when I asked him about Divya. Honestly, I never saw Annalise again. Not alive, at least. Every single nurse from then on out was different than the last. Like somehow my singular complaint had rewritten the entire staffing infrastructure of the hospital. And I mean every single one. Now, instead of having one nurse day in and day out, I'd been visited by 30 different nurses over the course of a few days. It didn't make any sense. I asked for different nurses, and that's sure as shit what I got. After about a month in that room, and with my suspicions rising, I started developing an escape plan. The only thing that was really holding me back was my casts. Since the day I woke up in the hospital, thick marble white plaster completely encased each of my legs. The casts didn't appear to have been applied by a professional, though. The surfaces weren't smooth, they were rough and bubbling. Some areas clearly had more plaster than others, and there didn't appear to be a rhyme or reason for that asymmetry. Not only that, but the material seemed unnecessarily dense and heavy, and the casts were tightly molded to each extremity. It was nearly impossible for me to move on my own, almost like they were created to function like chains, shackling me to that bed. Are my legs truly even broken? I considered, panic sweeping through me like a wildfire. I want to see my sister, I demanded. The nurse, a short man with a thick brown-red beard, dropped the clipboard he had been scribbling on in response to my defiance. It clattered to the floor. With a vacant expression painted on his face, he walked over to the door, opened it, and left. As the door creaked closed, revealing a glimpse of the waiting shadows, I grimaced. The uncertainty of the oppressive darkness that lingered outside my room had, over time, begun to cause me physical discomfort. I needed to know what was actually out there, but God, I desperately didn't want to know either. In a way, it represented my predicament. On the surface, I was in a hospital, but that was farce. An illusion for someone's benefit. In reality, some terrible darkness loomed around me, pulsing just below the surface, spilling in every so often through the cracks in the masquerade. After a few minutes, Dr. Osler paced into the room, letting the door sway shut behind him. Dr. Osler, you have told me Divya is alive. Countless times, you have assured me she's recovering here in this hospital. And yet, I haven't seen her once. Bring her here. If she's not healthy enough to come here, bring me to her. His gray-blue eyes bored vicious holes through me. He was livid, utterly incensed by my insubordination. She's not done yet, he muttered. I stared back at him, dumbfounded and brimming with rage. What the fuck does that mean? The doctor looked away from me with a contemplative glint behind his eyes, recalibrating his response. With his head turned to the side, though, I felt another emotion simmer inside my skull. An uncomfortable familiarity. As I studied a subtle skin-toned line that coiled down the side of his nose, my mind was pulled to the day of the crash. Before that horrible realization could fully crystallize, he spoke again. Diva's not ready for visitors, I mean. All right, well, what's the holdup? Tell me why she's not ready. His gaze met mine again, now grim and resolute. Soon. As that word crawled from his lips, he turned away from me and marched out into the darkness. I said nothing. No protestations, no name-calling, no angry last words. Instead, I felt my mind race. My nervous system buzzed with furious static, trying to comprehend and reconcile the overflow of information bombarding my psyche. Something about the way Dr. Osler's face contorted as he said that last word made the whole thing click into place. The pilot had a scar just like that. I could see it clear as day in my head, and I could finally recall what he shouted to Divya and I as he turned towards us from the cockpit. Fear stitched across his face. Something just landed on the wing. Moments later, that something violently ripped him from the plane. The impossibility of that realization lulled me to sleep like a concussion. Mental exhaustion just shut my body down minutes after the pilot de-ejected. Osler left the room. When I awoke, it was midnight. I had been asleep for a little over 6 hours. I may have slept for longer, had it not been for a sharp, stabbing pain in my low back. My salvation disguised as agony. I pushed my torso forward, twisting my hand behind my back to dig for the source of the pain. After a few seconds, My fingers landed on the curve of something metallic that had punctured through the fabric of the ancient bedding. Once I recognized the spiral object, my eyelids excitedly shot open. It was a tempered steel spring. Time and use had eroded the tip to where it had become sharp. The thing wasn't a buzzsaw by any means, but it was something accessible that could maybe dig through the plaster casts that were preventing my escape. However, before I could start trying to tear the spring out, a disturbing change compelled my attention. For the first time in a month, there was no light in my hospital room. As I scanned the darkened scenery, attempting to orient myself, I noticed something else as well, something that pried the wind from lungs, leaving me breathless and silently begging for air. A motionless blob of contoured shadow in the corner. Someone was in the room with me. Who's there? I whimpered. The silhouette sprung to life, stepping forward until they were looming over the end of my bed. When it grinned, my heart leapt, dancing between relief, disbelief, and terror, never staying on one emotion for too long before moving on to the next in the cycle. Divya. At first, she nodded her head slowly, but over a few seconds, her nodding sped up, becoming frantic. Inhumanly quick vertical pivots that seemed to have enough force to shatter the spine in her neck. Greedy paralysis enveloped my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could just watch as Divya lumbered around the side of the bed until she was right over top of me, still rapidly shaking her head up and down. As she bent over the bed's railing, the nodding stopped abruptly. Nearly forehead to forehead, my sister finally responded. Yes, it's me. Don't worry, okay? In fact, don't ask about me. I'm fine. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were gray-blue, like Dr. Osler's, like Nurse Annaliese's, like every nurse's eyes, actually. And with that, she stood up, turned away, and walked out the door. From that night on, I accepted my sister was dead. With my attention undivided, I worked singularly towards escape. Grief could come later after I was away from the thing that had killed her and commandeered her body. Disassembling the casts with the sharpened end of the spring was laborious. Every minute that thing wasn't in the room, I was scraping away at the plaster, making sure to focus my efforts on the underside of the mold, rather than the outside. That way, if it inspected the cast, it wouldn't be as obvious that I had been incrementally weakening the plaster. If it was in the room, camouflaged as a real human, I smiled, engaged in pleasant conversation, profusely displayed my gratitude, thanked it every chance I got. That's what it really wanted, I suppose. It wanted to feel appreciated. Giving it appreciation kept it docile. Eventually, I could tell that I had damaged the casts to the point where I could break myself loose with a few more forceful hits. Once I did, however, I knew there was no going back. My intention to slip out of its clutches would be written all over my freed legs. And as much as I attempted to discern a pattern to its appearances in my room, I just do not think there was one. Unfortunately, that meant there wasn't a right time to make my escape. I had to guess and pray it wasn't nearby when I made my move. Luck was on my side that day. Thing was close, but it was preoccupied. Despite shedding nearly 20 pounds of body weight in that hospital room, barely sustaining myself on the infrequent helpings of brackish meat soup the thing brought me, my legs couldn't hold me upright. They had simply atrophied too damn much, muscleless sleeves burdened with fragile bones and calcified tendons. Thankfully, my arms had retained enough strength to drag my emaciated body across the floor. With my back propped up against the wall aside the door, I halted my feeble movements and just listened. No footsteps running down the hall. No whispers of "aren't we taking such good care of you" coming from right outside. All I could hear was the fevered thumping of my heart slamming into my ribs. I took a deep breath, reached my arm up to the knob, and slowly slid the door open. It wasn't hell on the other side of the door like my restless mind had theorized on more than one occasion. Not in the literal sense, anyway. I really was in a hospital. It was just abandoned. Had been for a while, apparently. A discarded German newspaper I discovered was dated September of 1969. The dilapidated medical ward was dimly lit by the natural light that filtered in from various broken windows. Thick dust, shattered glass, and skittering insects littered the floor. I crawled around overturned crash carts and toppled transport beds like I was navigating the tunnels and trenches of Okinawa. At the very end of the hallway, I spied a patch of weeds illuminated by rays of bright white light. There it was, my escape. An open doorway. A portal to the world outside this place. Flickers of hope were quickly overshadowed by smoldering fear. As I got closer and closer to the exit, an unidentifiable smell was becoming more and more pungent. A mix of rotting fish, bleach, and tanning leather. The thing wasn't gone. It was still here, and when the aroma became truly unbearable, I knew I had reached the place it called home. I didn't see everything when I crawled by, but because the door had been ripped off its hinges, and a massive hole in the ceiling was casting a spotlight over its profane workshop, I saw enough to understand, as much as I possibly could understand anyway. The chamber that the stench was originating from was vast and cavernous. Maybe it served as a lecture hall or a cafeteria at some point in time. Now, though, it had a different purpose. It was where the thing kept its costumes. That abomination had pretended to be every person I would interacted with while in that hospital. Dr. Osler, Annalise, all the other nurses, and most recently Divya, a horrific stage play where it gladly filled all the roles. That entire month, I thought I had talked to dozens of people. In reality, it had been this goddamn mimic every single time, camouflaged by a rotating series of gruesome disguises. Hundreds of eyeless bodies hung around that room like scarecrows, arms held outstretched by the horizontal wooden poles that were tied across their backs. Thick, pulsing gray-blue tethers suspended the bodies in the air at many different elevations from somewhere high above. Despite the ungodly odor, most of them seemed to be in relatively good condition, with limited visible signs of decay. The assortment of fleshy mannequins swayed lifelessly in the breeze that spilled in through the minivan-sized hole in the ceiling, glistening with some sort of varnish as they dipped in and out of beams of sunlight. Then I saw it. A gray-blue mass of muscular pulp, roughly in the shape of a human being, cradling Annalise's eyeless corpse in its malformed arms at the center of the room. Thousands of flies' wings jutted from every inch of its flesh. Some were tiny, but others were revoltingly magnified. The largest I could see was about the size of a mailbox. Even though the thing appeared motionless, the wings jerked and twitched constantly, blurring its frame within a cloud of chaotic movement. As far as I could tell, it had its back turned to me and hadn't detected my interloping. Watching in stunned horror, the thing raised one of its hands, and I noticed it was holding something small and wooden. Every few seconds, it brought it down and delicately caressed the nurse's head with the object, dragging weathered bristles over her scalp. It was brushing Annalise's hair. Then it spoke, and I felt uncontrollable terror swim through my veins, causing my entire body to tremor like one of the abomination's wings. It sounded like 20 or 30 separate voices cooing in unison. Men, women, and even children saying the words together. A choir of the damned. Are not we taking such good care of you? Are not we taking such good care of you? I couldn't restrain my panic. Right before a blood-curdling wail involuntarily surged from my lips, I was saved by the thrumming of helicopter blades in the distance. The thing stopped speaking and tilted its head to the noise. At an unnaturally breakneck speed, it shot into the air and through the hole in the roof, carried into the sky by a legion of convulsing flies' wings. Then I was alone, howling into an airborne graveyard, with the myriad of preserved corpses acting as the only audience to my agony. They observed me crumble from their eyeless sockets, their stolen bodies still silently swaying in the wind. I didn't see Divya's body. Ultimately, though, I think that was for the best. After I crawled out of the hospital, it took me nearly a day to stumble across another living person. A man and his hunting dog. They delivered me to a real hospital, where I spent the next half year recuperating from the ordeal. I told the police about the plane crash, the abandoned hospital, as well as the thing in its museum of hanging bodies. They didn't dismiss my claims, nor did they call me crazy, but it was clear that they didn't plan on investigating it either. Whatever that thing was, the detectives knew about it, and they didn't intend on interfering with its proclivities. Maybe it was just safer that way. That all took place a decade ago. Since then, I've salvaged as much of myself as I could. It hasn't been easy, but in the end I put my life back together. Got married, had a few kids, symbolically buried Divya in a vacant grave with a tombstone. I listed her date of death as the day of the plane crash, and I hope that's actually true, but I do not know for sure, and I do not like to dwell on that fact. My biggest hurdle has been trusting people again, especially when I am alone in a room with one other person. It feels decidedly unsafe. Checking their eye color helps, but sometimes it's not enough. What if it's that thing in disguise looking to take me back to that godforsaken room? You might be wondering why I am speaking up after all this time. Well, I finally decided to post this because of what happened this afternoon. My wife returned home early from work. She's been acting odd, sitting on the couch by herself, listening but not speaking. Her eyes have always been dark blue. Today, though, they look a little different. I'm locked in our bedroom, and I can hear her saying something downstairs, but I can't discern the words. Once I post this, I'm going to open the door and find out. And I hope to God it's not what I think it is. We're going to take such good care of you.